G'day cybersecurity explorers, let's get into another episode on our journey. Today we're diving into the exciting world of application control. Imagine this, you're at work and there's a piece of software or a category of software that controls applications in your environment. Helps us manage what software is allowed to run on our computers. It's like having a bouncer at the entrance of a nightclub, only letting in the cool and trustworthy apps. But why do we need application control? Well, I've got a little story. It's not necessarily a malicious one, but something that came up for us over when we were working on a environment. So we wanted to help them out there. They were having some space issues that kept coming up over and over. Well, what turned out happened was that because they were running iPhones as their mobile fleet, they had iTunes installed on all of their machines. And so what would happen is they would install their phone into it, or they'd plug their phone in and they'd run a backup to iTunes. And that's about 8 gig or so at the time. People would also have music and stuff like that. And what would happen is that they were set up with roaming profiles, and so the roaming profile would then sync that up to the domain controller or the file server where the roaming profile was stored, and it would cause problems for the server, and eventually it would fill up, and sometimes it would be like very, very pervasive. It would be identified, it would be cleaned up, and then people would plug the iPhone back in and it would happen again. It wasn't until we created a redirected profile path that helped us there. But it's something that can come up. And so that's why application control is so important. It helps us avoid things like managing what software can be installed and where it stores its data. So to get started, we do an audit to see what software is running in our office. It's like taking a peek at the apps that we have on our computers. During one audit, we discovered a whopping 12 different web browsers. You know, that sounds like a lot, right? Well, what we did was we narrowed it down to 2 common browsers that work great for us. That's usually like a Firefox or an Edge type situation. And the reason you do that is it reduces your application footprint, meaning that you've got less patching to do in a month-to-month basis. And you know how often these browsers are getting hacked or vulnerabilities discovered. So, you know, reducing that amount of work is always a great idea. And then once we have our approved software list, we can enforce it using tools like Windows Defender Application Control. It's like locking the doors to keep the bad guys out. And application control doesn't stop at workstations, it extends to our servers too. You know, you got to make sure that they're only running the software that's required for them to be able to perform their duty. For a web server, you want to make sure that only the web services can run. For a domain controller, only the standard server services are running. All of those things are really important. But the really cool part is that by monitoring these blocked attempts that are coming up in your application control software, you can actually detect and stop cyber attacks in their tracks. One of the more common places for cyber criminals to store their exploits as they're getting in is in the C temp file or the user profile. And so by blocking those particular paths from running executables, you actually stop quite a lot of drive-by attacks, which is really important in this day and age with all of the broad publications of working proof of concepts of vulnerabilities. What we do is we capture and send those logs to a central repository, and if you are using a tool like Azure Sentinel, you might have a automated playbook that runs depending on certain detections. You also get all of the intelligence from Microsoft coming through for specific signals, and that gets updated as it's a SaaS service. That's really cool. Or you might have your own SOC, in which case you've got like a detective squad working behind the scenes making sure that it's all safe. So remember that application control really is one of the first steps that you should be taking to secure your environment, and by getting a handle on what your software is and an inventory of what software as well as physical hardware you've got, you're reducing your risks and protecting your confidentiality, integrity and availability. So that's it for today's adventure. I'd just like to thank you all for joining me, and you know, stay curious and stay secure.